Hello, and welcome to the Jewish Geography Podcast. This is Rabbi Eitan. So this week's Parshah is Vayikra, and it's the first Parshah in the book of Leviticus, in English, the book of Vayikra, which is basically a lot of laws and a lot of ritual laws, which for a lot of people reading it, if you don't have sort of the Shiva background of sitting and delving deeply into these things, can be somewhat dry and boring. But I wanted to step back from the particulars. But basically, the Parsha goes in and it starts talking about all the different kinds of sacrifices that one brings, what animals, what you bring with it, how you bring it, who brings it, what you bring it for, etc., and sort of the procedure of each different sacrifice. And of course, this is the sacrificial system that was first done at the temple itself, and then later, at the Mishkan, the tabernacle itself, and then later at the temple in Jerusalem, and eventually the second temple. When the temple was built, the law was that since this was the place that God had shown us to build his sort of permanent sanctuary, from that point on, we would no longer be able to offer sacrifices anywhere else, ever. That the holiness of the place of the temple would stay forever, regardless of even if the building itself stood or not. And thus, when the temple was destroyed, and until today, we're not able to bring sacrifices because we're really only able to bring them in the temple, on the Temple Mount, in a particular place, which was determined by God at the creation of the world. So, for the last 2,000 years, we've been without offering sacrifices, but our prayers are often, most of our sort of ritualized daily prayer life is around as if our prayers were sacrifices. So in the place of regular sacrifices that would happen in the temple, we have prayer services that we pray that God accept as if we were able to do the sacrifice itself. So I want to address a couple of things. One is there does tend to be a icky feeling in modern people when we think about slaughtering animals for our own religious purposes. And we tend to assume, without really even thinking about it, it's sort of just an underlying assumption that we haven't really examined, most of us. Maybe you have, but most of us haven't. That speaking to God from the heart, the words from your mind and from your heart, from your lips or in your mind, that these are non-physical sort of offerings, if you want to call them that we give to God. The underlying assumption is that non-physical form of offering is more spiritual, more pure, better. And I want to proffer a possibility that it might be that we are culturally conditioned to be prejudiced against physical offerings in favor of speech, non-physical offerings. And largely, I think that has to do with Christianity, because in the West, Christianity, basically came from Judaism, and in the West replaced it, and came with a very different view of spirituality, which was divorced from the temple and most of the mitzvot, the commandments in the Torah, many of which are very physical, and places a much higher premium on what's going on in your mind and your mouth, and meaning in terms of words, and in your heart, somewhat to the exclusion of a focus sometimes on the physical aspects. So in Judaism, there's no clean division between those things. In fact, I would argue that a division between the physical and spiritual is a Greek concept, which is foreign to Judaism and foreign to really monotheism, in that, God created the world and imbued everything in it with his holy sparks, with his sanctity. And there's really no reason to think that using a physical object to serve God is any less desirous or is any less holy than using one's mind and heart to have feelings and emotions to serve God. In fact, I would argue the opposite. So let me give you an example. So you have someone that loves you, right? And they say they love you. And when they say it, they really mean it, right? You know, the sweet nothings they whisper in your ear in bed are from their heart at the time when it's spoken. But what about if that person is not there for you when you really need them? You know, what happens when you get sick and you're no longer so fun to be around for a little while, or you need a lot of help, you need someone there to cook and clean for you, or whatever, change a bedpan to get, we could get as gross as you want, getting into these things. What if they're not there for you for those things? They're only there for the good feelings. And I would argue that feelings are nice, but if they don't come to real fruition in actions, they're pretty much meaningless. And in Judaism, that's true about our relationship with God also. Obviously, we want to have a relationship with God in our hearts and in our minds. But that's, one half, and maybe not even the more important half of what we're supposed to be doing, of our desire to connect to God and to serve Him. In Jewish law, we clearly reverse that order of priorities. Meaning, it's clearly according to the law. We don't really focus as much on what a person believes, only what they do or say. If they teach the wrong thing, that can be a crime, but just believing it's not. So there's clear preference for actions over thoughts and words. And there's a Middle Eastern saying, which is that prayers to God without sacrifices, sort of a Muslim saying in these parts, without sacrifice and sacrifices is just words. And we think of words as being superior, but maybe they're just words. Maybe they're empty air blowing out through your lips. Now, take your sheep, something valuable, or, in our day, if we were to rewrite these things, maybe you take your new car, one of the more expensive objects that you own, and you take it up and you light your car on fire on the altar to God. Now, what shows more commitment and more belief in God and His commandments? That you said some words, or that you took a prized possession and lit it on fire? Now, obviously, that's a bit of a joke because it's not quite like that. I mean, you would take an animal up and part of it would burn on the altar, part of it would go to the priests, and part of it would go to you. So you're essentially having a nice divine barbecue up there with in the presence of in the divine presence in Jerusalem. So it's not purely sacrificial, meaning it's not that you're, in many, if not most of the sacrifices, it's not purely that you're giving something up, but you are using a valuable resource up for a divine purpose that, otherwise you might have wanted to hang on to, or you might have wanted to keep 100% of it for you and your family. After all, you worked very hard for it, and it's very valuable. Animals like sheep and cows and whatnot were some of the most valuable possessions that people had. They were essentially like a form of currency. So I want to encourage you to think of a sacrifice as we read through the book of Vayikra, the book of Leviticus, not as some inferior way of serving God that thank goodness we don't have to do anymore. But I want to encourage you to think about the belief and strength of character necessary to serve God in that way, and what it says about us as a people, as a culture, that we feel so turned off by even the idea, many of us, of having to make a self-sacrifice in that way, and the idea that the suffering of an animal can serve a purpose, a spiritual purpose. Why would we not inherently believe that especially for those of us who eat meat, we just, outsource the killing to other people, to professionals. But, for those of us who eat meat, why would we turn our noses up at getting our hands a little bit dirty and actually having that experience for ourselves? And instead of outsourcing our spiritually intense moments to other people, in modern life, we outsource a lot of our important moments to other people, to professionals. We outsource, a lot of the care taken for sick and elderly people to nurses and hospitals and whatnot, and death to mortuaries and people, funeral homes, and birth to doctors and professionals, and killing the animals that we eat to butchers. And we never have to deal with the messy realities that allow us to live our lives. There's something I would almost dehumanizing about divorcing ourselves from all of these different forms of suffering which are still going. We just hide our face from them, so to speak, and don't let them sink in. But offering a sacrifice, taking an animal up to the Temple Mount, and in some cases actually killing it, slitting its throat yourself, or watching a priest do it, is an act that takes incredible strength of character, and it takes real commitment. Now, as opposed to just, saying words, which, that's all we have today, but hopefully soon and in the future, the temple will be rebuilt and we will return to making real sacrifices of animals and of things of value to give to God. Now, there's, a thought to give about that. So we're asked to give a lot of things for God. We're asked to give maaser, which is a tenth of our produce, to God. And that's in addition to sacrifices that we're supposed to bring at least 3 times a year. And in addition, we're also supposed to give to, the needy, the widows and orphans, and things beyond those basic requirements. So really, we're required to give quite a bit, a significant percentage of our wealth to people that need it more than us, or to people who God wants us to give it to, in the case of the priests. And I think this can inculcate a really positive value, which is, who says it belongs to you to start with? We often can get caught up in the idea that something is ours, that we got something through our own efforts. And that's great. It's, you should work hard. You should, do what you need to do to get along in life. We're not supposed to rely on miracles. But in the end of the day, there are lots of people working hard. There are lots of people trying. There are lots of smart people, well-educated people around in the world. Who's to say that you're not going to get hit by a truck walking into the street is an extreme example, but who's to say that your investments in the stock market will come out well? That there won't be a market crash. Who's to say that your company won't have some totally random thing happen to, that you won't get sued for a ton of money for something that you did accidentally, or maybe not at all, but you might lose anyway. Your success, if you have success, and you should live and be well and have much success, God bless you. But if you do have success, and any successes you have, we tend to take credit for, and then we blame God for our failures, right? And really, when we have to give from our wealth to God, it helps us recognize that our successes are also from God. We get some input. We get input into what we do, but what comes out is completely things that are out of our hands. You go to that job interview, you do your best, you present yourself the best you can. In the end, the process going on in the brain of another person who is in a different situation, who has all sorts of things going on behind the scenes that you don't know about, that's what's going to decide if you actually get the job or not simply how impressive you are. So all these things happen all the time, and we need to learn to appreciate God for what we have, for the good, as well as blaming him for the bad. In fact, maybe we might want to reverse that. So sacrifices are a good example of that, where we take one of the most valuable things that we have, an animal, we offer it up to God. We recognize that it is only by the grace of God that we have anything at all, that really we are lent our wealth in this world for the purpose of doing God's will with it, and that by bringing something of true value to us, something that it hurts a little bit to let go of, we show our true dedication to God, not instead of, but in addition to, prayer from the heart and thoughts in our hearts and minds. And by giving, we also strengthen that love for God. Anybody who has been in a long-term, healthy romantic relationship knows that your love grows by giving, not by taking. So it is by giving back to God that we grow and strengthen our love for him and for all the good things in the world that he has given us. So I bless you, and please bless me back, that we should all see God's hand revealed in our lives and appreciate the goodness that we're given with every breath. And with that, I am wishing you a Shabbat Shalom. Thanks for listening. And if you like the show, please go on to rabbieitan.com and look around, check out what else is there. You can go to patreon.com/rabbieitan if you want to give a little monthly donation. Every little bit helps, and the more donations received, the more often I will be able to do this podcast. So please go on over there. In the meantime, Shabbat Shalom.